once you go through a cancer diagnosis, I think there are many stages to this process, and there's this shock and awe, and then there's sort of like, okay, one foot in front of the other, and then there's this trying to look ahead. And that part of looking ahead, people ask you a lot of really interesting questions. What do you want to do before you die? Make your bucket list. My list was really weird. It was things like finish doing all the baby books that I haven't finished completely. Like my first kid has a great baby book, the second one, and the third is really bad. So I was going to go back and do those kinds of things, clean your photos, label your photos. Everybody else was like, I want to go to China to do that. So, and then there was this part of me that wanted to have, be in a relationship or have a partner to go do some of these things. So I was afraid that time was very precious and became extremely precious. Time has always been precious, but I was acutely aware of the preciousness of that. And I looked around and I saw people, their cancer would come back and different things would happen. And my situation was a little, certainly not the typical lumpectomy, have a nice life type of thing. So what if and what if? And I became obsessed with trying to find a guy. His life is lonely, and I had 3 wonderful boys, so it wasn't boring by any means. Do that. So I'd never really dated before. I guess I'd always, growing up, sort of had a boyfriend. I don't know how that even really happened, and I probably only had 4 or 5 boyfriends, my whole life, and then I got married, and here I am, and I've learned I didn't know how to date. So I was sort of intrigued by how one does that, and really starting to think about men and how they make decisions. It was sort of an interesting intellectual game. And I didn't really see myself meeting men in a bar, which seemed to be like the MO for younger people. So it was like, well, how do you meet people? I knew tons of people, and yet my friends were sort of, they were in shock that I had become serious about trying to date. It's just a fascinating process, and people I find fascinating. So I was interested in meeting anybody I could possibly meet. But so what part? So I'm in between my chemos. I was on a chemo regimen of every 3 weeks, and I was pretty sick with my chemos. So I really would kind of go down deep and sort of come up, and then I'm like, oh, gee, I'll call. So in the Portland Press Herald, they have the newspaper personals, which I don't think they even do anymore. But in those days, I had to learn what single, white, male, all of these, SWM, all of these different things was just funny to do that. So you do these things over the phone, and they would say, let's meet for coffee. So you meet for coffee, and, they say, well, I'll be, in a red shirt or something. And I'll say, well, I'll be the one with a hat on. And they're just like, okay, whatever. So of course the hat was because I didn't have any hair. And it was always kind of interesting, which I didn't appreciate probably initially, but these guys, we'd talk. And when people become nervous, you talk a lot. So I'm nervous. Usually the guy was really nervous. And then they're sort of like looking at me like, I don't think this woman has hair. Pretty universally, how they all turned out was the men were very polite. We had interesting conversations, and they would, like, I'll call you type of thing. And they literally would like run to their car. And I would never hear from them again. And a few that we had email touch, I'm like, oh, you know, hey. And they're just like, oh, you seem like a really nice person, but I really don't want to choose to get involved with somebody who's sick. And after a while, different guys would sort of talk about that and how it made them feel. A few would have reference to people who had been sick in their family. But men were so good at making things so black and white. You're sick, and I don't want to be involved with someone who's sick. It's like, what happened to whether you know, I'm actually, you know, a pretty nice person here. Someday I'll have hair again. So that was a fascinating thing. And there were many, many silly stories and how I met guys and how they were all like disasters. And I even met one of these guys who didn't seem to have a job. And I kept saying, so what do you do for a living? Well, he's an inventor. And then he had some other stories about what he did. Turns out he was actually on his way to jail. And that was, so after that, my friends who were the Attorney General for the state of Maine and all of that said, Meredith, in the future, when you really would like to date somebody more than like once, call me. Call me. So we clearly are, my friends sort of put a team together to start to say, okay, Meredith, if you're going to do this, which we don't understand, we think you're crazy, you're just whatever, but if you have to do this, you need to, we need to screen these people.